All right, we're back. Graveyard Shift Movie Podcast, episode number 81. This week, it was supposed to be Don't Breathe 2, but, you know how things go around here. Sometimes plans don't go as expected. So, I decided to watch Scream from 1996, seeing as how the new Scream is about to come out. I think as I'm recording this, it might be out today. Today might be the release of it. But I'm not sure. But my plan is that today, when you're watching this, is Scream. Monday will be Scream 2. And then the next two Mondays will be Scream 3 and Scream 4. And then I'll be able to jump into Scream 5. But to get to the newest one, we have to go all the way back to the very first one and check out Scream, which I know a lot of people really like. A lot of people say it's their favorite horror movie and stuff. And I've never been big on Scream. And this was the first time I watched it in forever. I don't know how long. But I definitely liked it a lot more than I remember liking it. I'm going to rock a 7.5 for Scream. I don't know if I've ever given that score. Is that a unique? I'm the one keeping track back here, but I need to check if I've ever given a 7.5 to anything. But yeah, it was good. It was good. I liked it. I liked it a lot more than I remember liking them. So, now do the sequels. Will the sequels be able to live up to that? I'm not sure. I know 2 has Timothy Olyphant, which I'm hype about. 3, this is the only one, I think this is the only one I've ever watched. I don't remember watching the others. I may have caught glimpses of them. But I mean, I think almost everybody knows this movie, but I haven't watched any of the other sequels, so those will be first time watches for me. But anyway, spoiler warning for Scream if you've never seen it. I'm gonna ruin everything about it, so you've been warned. The movie opens up, and I mean, this is just one of the most iconic movie openers of all time, I think, which is Drew Barrymore is hanging out in her house. Not playing Drew Barrymore. She's playing someone else, but, Drew Barrymore. Drew Barrymore is in her house. She's just, making popcorn and shit, and she gets a random phone call. And she's like, hey, this is the wrong number or whatever. And the guy's like, oh, okay, and he hangs up. And then he calls her back. And he's like, oh, I just wanted to call you back to apologize, for calling the wrong number. And she's like, it's fine. And then she goes to hang up, and he's like, well, hey, wait a minute, let me talk to you. And she's like, there are hotlines for that, And I was like, oh, shit. So she hangs up again. Then the dude calls back again and starts talking to her. And they start talking about, she's about to watch a movie and shit. And she's like, oh, it's some scary movie. And he's like, oh, you like scary movies? And she's like, yeah. And he's like, what's your favorite scary movie? And she answers Halloween. And then he, I think, is like, what was that Nightmare on Elm Street movie? The Freddy. Yeah, I like Freddy. And then Drew Barrymore hits him with well, the first one was good, but the rest of them were pretty bad. Which, obviously, this movie was directed by Wes Craven, who did Nightmare on Elm Street. So I don't know how many he was involved with. I know he did 1 and New Nightmare, and he might have been involved with 2, but I think he definitely checked out after 2 if he was still around. But yeah, so that's, this is one of the movies where they're like, oh, we're getting meta. It's just horror references everywhere. They reference Wes Craven all the time. There's a lot of John Carpenter references in here too. At one point, Sydney's friend even like mixes their names together, and it's like you're starting to sound like this is some Wes Carpenter movie or whatever, you know. Um, but anyway, uh, so they're just chatting, you know. And then the guy's like, "Hey, why don't you tell me your name?" You know, and she's like, "Why?" And he goes, "I want to know who I'm watching right now." And she was like, "Oh shit!" And she immediately like starts locking doors and stuff, right? Um, and and he's just like, "Come on, just tell me what your name is," you know. And then she goes, "Hey, listen, asshole!" And then he flips the switch, and he's like, "No, you listen, you little bitch." He's like, he just starts yelling at her. And then after he's done yelling at her, he calls her Blondie, and that Drew Barrymore is blonde in this movie. So now she knows he's not bullshitting, and he sees her. So she runs again, starts locking the doors and shit. Um, he has a line where he's like, or she's like, "What do you want?" And he's like, "I want to see what your insides look like." And then like the doorbell behind her rings or whatever, and it scared the shit out of me. Gonna be honest, like I, I wasn't expecting the doorbell to ring. Um, so she goes to the door, or no, she goes away from the door. She's like, "Fuck that," you know. Uh, and she starts talking about how her boyfriend is on his way home and shit, and he's big and he plays football and he'll kick the shit out of you, you know. And then uh, the guy she's talking to is like, "Oh, your boyfriend, huh? Is his name Steve?" And she's like, "How do you know that?" And he's like, "Why don't you go to the back patio?" Which the whole time she was talking on the phone, I was looking and I could swear, I was like, I see someone out there. And I thought it was maybe the guy like talking to her. But anyway, uh, she goes to the back patio, turns the light on, and we see her boyfriend taped to a chair. Um, and the guy on the phone says he wants to play a game with her. He's like, "Turn off the light to the patio, and then I'll, tell you the game." So she turns it off, and the boyfriend is not happy about it. The boyfriend is like, "You fucking bitch!" He's like, just yelling and shit. Um, and so he tells her that the name of the game is that he'll ask her a question. If she gets it right, Steve will live. And she doesn't really get to say she wants to play the game. We're just playing the game. There is no choice here. So he says, "Name the killer in Halloween." He's like, "You said it was your favorite scary movie, right? This should be no problem, you know." And after a while, she does manage to get it right. And so then he's like, "All right, now on to the real question." And he goes, "Who is the killer in Friday the 13th?" And immediately she starts going, "Jason, Jason, it was Jason." And no, because he's like, that's incorrect. And she's like, "I've seen that movie 1,000 times. It was Jason." And he's like, "If you've seen it 1,000 times, you would know that it was the mother who was the killer in the first movie. Jason didn't show up till the sequel," which I feel like used to be a big trivia thing before. Was that, did you know that in the first Friday the 13th it was Jason's mom, it wasn't him or whatever? But now I'd like to think that everyone knows it's Jason's mom. I take that back, because me and Maverick, like a year or two ago, went through all the Friday the 13th movies. And during the first one, he didn't know it was Jason's mom doing the killing. When it does the reveal for her, he was like, it's this old bitch? Where's Jason at?" So I take it back. If you're Maverick, you didn't know that Jason's mom was the killer in the first one. But anyway, he says, "Ooh, that's the wrong answer." He says, "You'll get another question, but Steve is out." And then you see like a close up of Steve getting stabbed. For some reason, they don't show you him getting stabbed. And then when she looks at him, he's all disemboweled and shit. Like his organs are hanging out. So then the guy goes, "All right, final question. What door am I at?" And she doesn't answer in time. And then the next thing you know, the patio glass door gets bust open with a chair. It was a pretty good scare. It got me a little bit. She runs. She goes outside. She's able to look in, and we get our first look at Ghostface in the movie. And he's stalking through the living room. as she's outside, she sees her parents start to pull up in the driveway. Um, and so she starts to like walk over there, but then there's one window, and she looks, and it's Ghostface's back, and then he like turns around and looks at her, and he busts out the window and grabs her. They scuffle and shit. She manages to get away and start running. The parents are now out of their car by now, or still, they're like in the driveway. They're parking. And she starts running, but Ghostface is running behind her. And this is probably maybe the most iconic shot of the movie, which is he eventually catches up to her and then turns her body so he can come across and stab her in the chest. And so he stabs her. He gets on top of her and starts to choke her, but she manages to kick him in the nuts and get up again. And she goes stumbling over to where her parents are walking, and they're outside now. They're walking in the door. But she's not able to get enough breath to call out for them. So they go inside without seeing her, and then Ghostface catches her and starts stabbing her on the ground and shit. The parents go inside, and they start noticing that she's missing and shit. The popcorn's burning, and all this shit. And it was a weirdly, like, sad scene of them trying to find their daughter and stuff. And then the mom goes to call 911, but the Drew Barrymore has been carrying the phone the whole time that she was running away. So the phone's still on. So when she picks up, they can hear her being dragged along the ground and shit. And then the phone goes dead. And so the dad's like, all right, you go to the neighbor and get help. I'll stay here or whatever. And so the mom's like, okay. And then as she goes out the front door, we see Drew Barrymore strung up in a tree with her organs hanging out and shit, and she's dead. And that's the opening of the movie, because then right after that they cut to Sidney Prescott, who will be the main character of the movie, and that's where the movie really starts. But yeah, this movie, I think this beginning had a lot of like Psycho vibes, where the main lady in Psycho was like the only famous name. She was the name, I think, which was Jamie Lee Curtis's mom, funny enough. And there's a lot of Jamie Lee Curtis talk and Halloween talk in this movie. So I wonder if it's kind of intentional. But obviously she's killed like 30 minutes into Psycho. She's the girl getting stabbed in the shower scene. And she was the top billed actress. She was the star of the movie. And then she was dead. And in this movie, I think most of the marketing, Drew Barrymore was on the posters, and Drew Barrymore was the top billed and in the trailers and stuff. So having her die off like this, it was like, whoa, what the fuck, And then we cut to these other nobodies, who at the time, Courtney Cox is in the movie. Obviously, she was known because of Friends, which there's a fun story about, because her character is real bitchy in this movie, and they weren't sure she could play a bitch character. So she like had to write an essay to Wes Craven and stuff about how I can do it, I promise, But and David Arquette's in it. I don't know, when did Ready to Rumble come out? Because as we all know, that's what made David Arquette a star. But anyway, the beginning of this movie was very psycho-ish. They kill off the main girl immediately. So we cut to Sidney Prescott. She's in her bedroom, and her boyfriend Billy climbs through the window and startles her. So Billy's there to start talking about how they don't get physical anymore. When they started dating, they were R-rated, as he puts it, on their way to NC-17. They were just doing stuff above the clothes, or But he says recently we've cooled down to like PG-13. We don't do anything, And she's like, okay, well, we can fool around a little bit, And so they start kissing on the bed. All this time that this is happening, there's a very slow version of Don't Fear the Reaper by Blue Oyster Cult playing. And I wonder if, because obviously, spoiler, Billy is a killer, you know? And so I wonder if there's a lot of weird, when you look back at this movie, there's a lot of like, oh, look at that and stuff. So the Don't Fear the Reaper while she's, you know, I wonder if that was to do with, because he was the killer and stuff, you know? So then, fucking, they make out for literally like a couple seconds, and then she's like, alright, that's enough, you know? So he goes to leave, and before he leaves, she like flashes him. I'm not sure if she was naked under there. It kind of seemed like she had a bra on, but she flashes him as he's leaving and shit. Uh, on her way to school the next day, she walks straight into this big media swarm. There's news vans everywhere and shit. Uh, there's you know, there's the whole town's going crazy. This is when we get our first look at Courtney Cox, and she's wearing like this highlighter colored skirt and like a blazer and shit. Uh, and Sydney's friend, Rose McGowan, played by Rose McGowan, comes walking up to her and tells her about the people who were murdered last night, and that's why everyone is out here, you know. Uh, they get to school. As they're in class, Sydney gets called away to go to Henry Winkler's office, who is playing the principal of the school. Shout out to Henry Winkler. And she's having to be interviewed by the police just to make sure, you know, were you close to the victim, you know, all that normal shit. As she's getting interviewed by the police is when we get our first look at David Arquette as Dewey. And he's just like, hey, Sydney, you know. So anyway, they do their interview. The kids get, after that, we cut to the courtyard of the school, and there's an announcement over the speaker saying, you know, kids should go straight home after school. They should walk in groups of 2 or 3. And, you know, because there's a killer on the loose. So they don't, and it, so far, has just murdered 2 teens. So, you know, they don't want you fucking, you know, getting slaughtered. So as we're in the courtyard, this is when we get introduced to the main cast, the rest of the group, which is Randy, played by Jamie Kennedy, and then Stu, played by Matthew Lillard, making his return to the podcast. It's funny that I think we've only ever had him on once. I think when we did 13 Ghosts might be the only time Matthew Lillard's been on. But it feels like we've talked about him a lot more. But Matthew Lillard is back as Stu. Maybe his most iconic role besides Scooby-Doo, maybe, you know. But we meet the characters for the first time. There's a lot of interesting stuff where Stu is dating Sydney's friend, Rose McGowan. I don't know her name. She's the only one out of the group that I don't know her name. So I'm just going to call her Rose McGowan the whole time. Stu's dating her, so they're sort of cuddled up. She's talking about how the killer could just as easily be a girl as it is a man. And Stu is like, it's not a girl, you know? And then Sydney starts talking about, you know, how could anyone murder someone? And Stu goes, well, you take a knife and you stab him from the groin and slice up or whatever. And as he's saying that, Billy gives him like a killer look, you know. And then after that too, they're talking about like Randy starts accusing, or he's like, "Where were you, Stu?" You know. And Stu's like, "I didn't kill anybody." And Billy's like, "Yeah, no one's saying you were." And he gives him another look, you know. And it's just very interesting looking back at these little subtle things. Also, during this conversation, we learned that the Drew Barrymore used to be Stu's girlfriend, and then she dumped him, even though Stu says that he dumped her. So now we go home, and Sydney's back at home, and she flips through some TV channels and eventually comes across the news channel where Courtney Cox is on the news. And she's talking about how this is only the second time in a year a tragedy like this has happened or whatever, because last year Sydney's mom was murdered, raped and murdered, and found in like a ditch or something, you know. And Sydney immediately, like, turns it off. And she's like, ugh. So, from there, that's why we start to learn that Sydney is having a hard time with this physical stuff in her relationship, is because of the traumatization of her mother's rape. And also throughout the movie, everyone starts, apparently her mom got around a lot, let's just say that. And so she's sort of living in that of, like, her mom was known to be easy and stuff. And uh, yeah, it was interesting that she's having to deal with this trauma to overcome, like, these physical aspects of her relationship. Um, so anyway, Sydney falls asleep. She wakes up. She gets a call from Rose McGowan. I don't remember what she says, but then she hangs up again. And then the phone calls, like, right back. And she's like, what do you want now? But it's fucking Ghostface. And he's like, hey, Sydney, you know? And he starts talking to her. She thinks it's Randy. And she's like, you're trying to be like those horror movies, you know? And then Ghostface is like, do you like scary movies? And she's like, no. They're all the same thing. Some mass killer chasing a girl with big tits who's running up the stairs when she should be running out the door. Uh, so anyway, dude, same thing, starts talking about how he's watching her and shit. Sydney doesn't fucking believe him. And then he's like, she's like, where are you? And he's like, I'm on your front porch. And so she walks over to the door, and this is when she's like, all right, well, I call your bluff. And she unlocks the door and walks outside. And she doesn't see anyone. But she still, like, walks around the porch, and she's like, oh yeah, well, if you see me, what am I doing? And she's like spinning in circles or whatever. And then she's like, yeah, that's what I thought. And she's about to hang up, and that's when the dude is like, if you hang up on me, you'll die like your mother. And she's like, what? And she's like, fuck you, asshole. And she hangs up on him, goes back inside. As soon as she closes the door, Ghostface pops out behind her. He's inside the house. They start to fight a little bit. She gets away from him and runs to the door, but she put the chain lock on, and so she's like trying to open it, and then she realizes, oh fuck, the chain lock's still on. But Ghostface is back up, so she doesn't have time to unchain it. So she goes running upstairs to her room, barricades the door. Ghostface is able to, like, stick his head and his arm in, and he's like slashing at her, you know. She goes to call 911, but the phone is busy or out. I think it might be busy. I think she might have dropped the phone downstairs instead of hanging up. But so then she goes on her computer and goes to, like, a 911 operator thing and starts typing to them. And they're like, what's your emergency? But then when she turns around, Ghostface is gone. And so she's like, oh, fuck, you know. But then, like, not even a couple seconds after Ghostface is gone, Billy comes climbing through her bedroom again. And he's like, hey, I heard screaming in here, you know, the door was locked and shit. And she's like, Billy, there's someone in the house. He was trying to kill me. She hugs him, and Billy hugs her. But then as he's hugging her, one of them big-ass block cell phones from the 90s falls out of his back pocket and lands on the ground. And she backs up and immediately is like, you know? And so she runs away from him and goes out the door. And as she goes out the door, she runs straight into the Ghostface mask. And she's like, but then it's just Dewey. And he's like, oh shit. And he gets scared or whatever. And that was a funny scene. But anyway, so then the next thing we know, we cut and fucking Billy is getting arrested because she's like, hey, this guy had a cell phone. He shows up right after the kid. You know, she's very logical about, you know, her thinking here. The whole time he's like, it isn't me, you know. Sydney's chilling out in the back of an ambulance. This is when I thought I learned that Dewey and Sydney were brother and sister, but I guess I had missed that that Rose McGowan had showed up, because Rose McGowan and Dewey are brother and sister. So they're related. So that's the sibling duo in this movie. Courtney Cox shows up, tries to get an interview with Sydney, but she's blown off, you know. Also, she has like a scene where she like belittles her cameraman, where she's like, "I know you're fat, but when I tell you to hurry up, you hurry up." You know, her cameraman is played by, I don't know his fucking name, but I'll add this in post what his name was. But he was in Deadwood, and he played a cool ass character where he was just this big, mean, fucking tough dude. I want to say his name was Billy, but that might not have been it. And he was the special brother and Something About Mary, who the Frank and Beans, who says, you know, that and stuff. And he's in a ton of shit. So shout out to him playing the cameraman in this movie. Kenny the cameraman. Shout out Kenny the cameraman. So anyway, they take Sydney to the police station where she's making her statement and stuff. The police go in to question Billy, and their opening question is, "What were you doing with a cell phone anyway?" And I was like, "Oh boy, this movie showed its age a little bit there with they're like, you got a cell phone, that's awful weird, you know." But Billy's like, you know, everyone has one. He still remains that he's innocent. Dewey then goes and checks on, like, to see if they can get a bead on where the costume was bought and who it was bought by. But the costume, they're like, it's sold everywhere. There's no way to track the purchase, you know. Which I wonder if, because you can buy this shit anywhere. Ghostface mask, you'll always see a bunch of Ghostface during Halloween. I don't know, was this mask, I wasn't around back here, but was this mask around when this was, and they just pulled it out and used it for the movie? Or was this like a custom made thing, and then afterwards is when it started selling and shit? Or was it a known costume that they used? If anyone feels like finding that out and commenting in the comments, that'd be cool. So anyway, Courtney then there's nothing for the night. So Rose McGowan goes to take Sydney, and she's gonna stay the night at her house. On their way out, Courtney Cox tries to get an interview with Sydney, and her friend is like, "Nah, fuck off," you know. But Sydney's like, "No, she's just doing her job." And Courtney Cox is like, "Yeah, you know." So Sydney asks Courtney Cox how her book is coming along. And Sydney goes, "Oh, pretty good. You know, next year it'll be out or whatever." And Sydney goes, "All right, I'll have to buy a copy." And she starts to turn around and leave. And Courtney Cox goes, "I'll send you one." And then Sydney just turns around and just socks her in the face, you know. And it was like, oh shit. And everyone was like, oh, world star, you know. So they leave. That night, she's staying with her friend, and she gets another phone call from Ghostface this time, making fun of her. He's like, "You locked up Billy Boy," and he, you know, and he's just, yeah, and she's like, and she, you know, puts the phone down and runs out of the room. Dewey, who's come home at this point too, has a great where he just is like, "Who is it?" And everyone runs by him, and he goes and picks up the phone. And he just goes, "Hello," like that, and that made me chuckle. That's when I found out that Rose McGowan and Dewey were the siblings. So then on the news that morning, we see that the man who is being convicted of killing Sydney's mom is Cotton Weary, played by Liev Schreiber, who's in a bunch of shit. I still call him Sabretooth a lot from the X-Men Origins movie. But yeah, he's in everything, you know. Also that morning, Stu says, you know, they released Billy from his cell. His cell phone log was clean and everything. You know, there's nothing on him. So that morning at school, or as Sydney's heading into school that morning, she sees Courtney Cox again at the news van, and she goes walking over, and she's like, "Hey, I'm not trying to fight, you know." But she starts talking about the book, and the book that Courtney Cox is writing is about how Cotton Weary is an innocent man. He didn't murder Sydney's mom. She says that, you know, she talked to Cotton Weary for years, and for a lot, And Cotton Weary always admit he slept with her, but that was it, you know. But Sydney says she saw him, and Courtney Cox says, no, you saw someone. Apparently, she saw someone leaving wearing her mom's jacket, but Courtney Cox is like, you got the wrong guy. And now, because of she mislabeled Billy as the killer, and now she's starting to learn that it's someone else, she starts to doubt, like a couple scenes from now, that she got the Cotton Weary thing right. So there's this whole where Cotton Weary might be innocent. So she goes inside, and Stu is being very. Stu is very. I don't know why they're friends with Stu in this movie, because he's very, like, just brash, and I don't know. Stu gives off a weird vibe. But then they got a guy running down the hallway dressed as Ghostface, running into people's, like, woo, and he, like, runs at Courtney, or not Courtney, Sydney, and she, like, closes her eyes and gets up against the lockers and shit. And Stu's laughing the whole time. He's like, yeah, yeah. So Sydney is like, I'm out here. So she goes walking down the hall. As she gets further down the hall, she bumps into Billy, who's back to school. And she's like, or he's like, you still don't think it's me, do it? And she's like, no, I know it's not you. Someone called my house last night and shit. And I swear, another one of them little things where she goes, someone called my house last night, and he's looking at her, but then keep in mind, Billy or Stu is down the hallway, and I swear he does like to look over to where Stu was standing down the hall or whatever. But anyway, he's talking to her, and he really blows it. Like, he just starts talking about her dead mom and how she's impacting their life, and he wants his girlfriend back, and they don't fuck and stuff. Like, it's real. He really didn't do a very good job of sweet talking there. But she's like, fuck off, and she goes walking away. We get a scene of Henry Winkler, and he expels the kids dressed as Ghostface. There was two of them, which is pretty ironic as well. And they're like, this isn't fair. And Henry Winkler's like, you know what? It's not fair. If it was fair, I'd gut you right now and let your organs fall. And, like, I was like, oh shit, Henry Winkler. So Sydney goes to the bathroom, goes into a stall. She sits down. As she's sitting down, she hears, like, these chicks come in and start shitting on her, talking about how she's crazy and her mommy was a whore and all this stuff. The one chick that's dressed as a cheerleader theorizes that, Sydney had suicidal thoughts and instead of killing herself decided to kill others. So she's theorizing that Sydney is the one that's actually killing all these people, So they leave. Sydney comes out, starts to, like, wash her hands or whatever. And then she hears, like, Sydney. And she looks around, doesn't see anything. She peeks under the stalls to see if there's anyone sitting there, and there's no one. So she's like, okay, and she goes and turns around again. But then she hears it louder, another whisper. So now she's like, what the fuck? So she's looking again, and she looks under the stall this time, and we see two boots step down off of the toilet, and then the robe, the black Ghostface robe, fall down to cover his feet. And Ghostface is here. He fucking jumps out. He lunges at her, but she's able to, like, dodge it, and he falls into a sink, and then she goes running out, and she runs out of school, which I thought was weird, because there's a teacher right down the hall, and she doesn't go, hey, fucking Ghostface is in the thing, So I thought it was kind of weird. She doesn't tell anyone. Apparently there is a deleted scene of her going to Henry Winkler's office and telling him that Ghostface was there, which will explain in a little bit. They get an announcement that school has been suspended and there's a town curfew of 9 o'clock, So explain kind of why he decided to get rid of school, because Ghostface is in the fucking school now. So she gets out. We get our first scene after that of Dewey Cox and Dewey Cox of Dewey and Courtney Cox meeting together. She, I think, kind of tries to flirt with him just to get information, but he's flirting with her for real. And by the end of it, I think he does win her over some. And then right after that is when Henry says that school has been suspended and all that shit. So Stu then is walking with the girls, and he tells them that he's throwing a party at his house and shit, and they should come over. And Rose McGowan is like, yeah, Sid, it would probably be good for you, you know? And so she's like, okay, okay. Uh, so they leave. We cut back to Henry Winkler in his office, and he's wearing the Ghostface mask, and he's looking in the mirror, and he's like, you know, playing around and shit. And then he gets a knock on his door, and he goes to check, and there's no one there. And so he's like, And so he closes it, and then it happens again. And this time, he, like, walks around the room outside and shit. And then he goes and opens up the doorway to look down the hall of the school. And he's like, all right, listen here, asshole. And then the janitor is standing there, and he goes, what'd you say to me? And the janitor is just wearing a straight up Freddy Krueger outfit. It's the sweater, the hat, you know, everything. And Henry Winkler's like, oh, sorry, you know, and closes the door. He goes back to his office, and as the door closes, Ghostface is standing behind it, and he jumps on Henry Winkler and stabs him to death. And poor Fonz is dead now. Um, this is when we get a scene of Sydney and Rose McGowan at Rose's house, and she starts to doubt that she got Cotton Weary right. She's like, maybe I did, you know, get the wrong guy. After that, we go to a scene of Stu talking to Randy at the video store that Randy works at. He's talking about how he thinks that Billy is the killer, even though there might be some slight ulterior motives because he wants to get with Sydney. But he's talking about how he thinks Billy is the killer, and Stu goes, "Why would someone want to kill their girlfriend?" And Randy goes, there's a million reasons. And as he says that, like, the girl standing behind him is like, huh? And, like, looks at him. And then he's standing there like, it could be because she doesn't want to sleep with him and all this shit. And the girl's like, and, like, walks off, you know? But anyway, this is when, iconic line, which is, Randy just starts, like, freaking out. And he starts talking about how Billy meets every aspect of the killer and all this stuff. And then he's like, it's like a movie. Everybody's a suspect and shit. And then he's like, I'm telling you, Billy's the killer. And he turns around and walks right into Billy's chest. And Billy's like, what'd you say? You know? And Billy starts to intimidate him. And Randy's like, oh, yeah, you know, sorry. And then Bill walks away. And then immediately Randy turns to Stu and says, see, you telling me that guy's not a killer, you know? And so that's a good scene. After that, we see the whole town, like, shutting down and shit. Dewey is driving Sydney and Rose McGowan to the party at Stu's house. As he drops them off, then there's a part in here somewhere where Dewey is talking to the sheriff, and as he's talking to the sheriff is smoking a cigarette, and then he throws it down on the ground and steps on it. And the way they shoot his boot, I was like, are they trying to make you think that the sheriff is the killer? Like, it was weird how they shot the boot. And then after Dewey drops them off at the party, there's a jump scare where Dewey bumps into Courtney Cox, who's wandering outside. And fucking... Oh, this is also... Sorry. So he bumps into Dewey Cox... Or Dewey... Oh, Dewey Cox is fucking... The Tale of Dewey Cox or whatever, right? That movie. That's a good movie. Shout out to that movie. But anyway, what I'm trying to get at is the way they're filming it, they make it seem real creepy with Dewey being there. And the fact that they zoomed in on the cop boot and you've seen these boots stepping off of the toilet, I was like, are they trying to make you think Dewey is the killer? But he's like, I'm going to go on a walk. And she's like, well, can I go with you? And he's like, yeah. And so as she's about to leave, Kenny, the cameraman, hands her something, which I thought was a mic at the time to, like, get the conversation they have, but we'll learn in a little bit is like this little camera. So anyway, they go for like a walk, but then there's a knock on the door, and Dewey just brings her into the party, and everyone's like, oh, you know, you're that girl that I watch on TV. And this is when we learned it was a camera because she puts it like on the table in the living room. And in a little bit, we'll learn it's like a live feed to the party and shit, so they can see everything happening. So anyway, the Rose McGowan is like, all right, I'm gonna go get some beer, you know. So she goes out into the garage, and we see, you know, the garage door, and like a cat runs through this little cat door, dog door that they have on the garage door. And she goes to the fridge and gets some beer, but then the door shuts and locks, and then the light goes out, and she's like, all right, assholes, what's the deal, you know? So she's like, whatever, and she just hits the button, and the garage door starts to come up, and she's just going to go out through the garage. But as she gets to it, it stops, and then goes back down, and she's like, what the fuck? And she turns around and sees Ghostface standing there. And once again, everyone thinks it's fucking Randy, who are dressing up as Ghostface, you know? So she thinks it's Randy. She's like, you know, joking with him and shit. But then he pulls out a fucking knife and grabs her arm and cuts her. And she's like, oh, this is real shit, you know? So they start to have their fight. She throws beer bottles at him and shit. And they're just hitting him in the dick and in the face. And she manages to stun him enough to where she tries to climb through the cat door in the garage. But she gets stuck. She's not able to make it. So, another iconic part of this movie is then Ghostface goes and hits the garage door and lifts it up until like her head meets where the ceiling part is, and then just and snaps. And Rose McGowan is dead. Right after this, Billy shows up to the party. And I think Stu is like, you guys gonna go upstairs and work some things out? And Billy's like, real subtle, Stu, you know? And she's like, no, we do need to talk about stuff, you know? So they go upstairs, talk about shit. After this is when Courtney Cox goes back to the van, and this is when we learn that it's a live feed to the party. But there is an added aspect of it has a 30-second delay, because he can still see Courtney Cox in the party. And so he's like, how long did it take you to get here? And he's like, and she's like, maybe 30 seconds, you know? So he's like, okay, so they have a 30-second delay on this party footage. Up in the bedroom, Sydney tells Billy how she's scared and she's tired of letting her past dictate how her life will be now and shit. And she needs to accept who her mom was and, you know, all this stuff. And she's tired of, you know, letting that get in front or get in the way of, you know, what she has going on right now and stuff. And so basically she decides to let Billy take her virginity. I'm assuming she's still a virgin at this point. But she's like, yeah, let's do it, you know? This is when down on the couch the kids are watching Halloween, and they're just talking about Jamie Lee Curtis's tits and shit. And the girls are like, yeah, she couldn't even afford to buy a good pair. And Randy is like, what the fuck did you just say? You know, he's super pissed. After this, we get the rule of also it's intercut with like God, I can't remember her name, but she's been in a couple movies we watched. But she's the girl who is naked in bed and gets killed by Ghost Michael Myers and stuff. The totally girl, you know. But as she's about to show her tits off, they're like, all right, here comes the obligatory tit shot. And it shows, like, Sydney taking off her shirt and stuff. And they're like, yeah, you know, and cheering her on. And at this point, Halloween music is straight up playing. The little bum, bum, that little piano that plays throughout all of Halloween and shit. And it plays a lot during this part. This is when Randy lists the 3 rules of horror movies. He goes, no sex. And they throw, like, popcorn at him and shit. He's like, no drugs or alcohol. And they're booing him again. And then he's like, and number 3, never say, I'll be right back, because you're never coming back, you know? And then Stu is like, hey, I'm going to go get some more beer. You want some? And Randy's like, oh, okay. And then Stu's like, I'll be right back. Ooh, it goes walking out the door. We go outside, and there's a bang on the van. And Dewey's there, and he comes to get Courtney Cox to go for another walk, a longer walk. And once again, this creepy music starts to kick in and shit. And Dewey's like, what? You're not scared, are you? You know? And I was like, are they trying to are they trying to make you think Dewey is the killer right now? And he like shines a flashlight in his face as he's saying it and all this shit. But they go, walking or whatever. Um, Randy gets a phone call at the party that tells them that something happened. I honestly don't remember what it was, but it doesn't matter. All it matters is that whatever this phone call was, it made all the other kids leave. They were like, fuck yeah, and they go leaving. Um, and on their way leaving, they get in their cars and they go driving down the road, and Courtney Cox and Dewey are walking, and they get fucking run off. Like, they fall into a ditch. Dewey lands on top of Courtney. He gives her a smooch, and then he's like, oh, I'm sorry, I'm on duty or whatever. But they just so happen to land next to a car that belongs to Sydney's dad. I haven't mentioned it up to this point, but this whole movie, they've been mentioning Sydney's dad is nowhere to be seen and shit. And like, he's kind of the prime suspect to have murdered the mom and all this stuff. And so they keep looking for him and they can't find him. So now the car is here. And there's been instances where they've even said that maybe the dad is the one doing all this killing and shit. So they Dewey sees this and he's like, what is Sydney's dad doing here? And so they go running. Back up in the bedroom, Sydney and Billy are getting dressed again. And she asks him, she's like, who did you use your one phone call on when you were in jail or whatever? And he's like, oh, I called my dad. And she goes, but I saw Sheriff, whatever his name was, call your dad. And he goes, yeah, I called him, but no one answered. And so she's kind of quiet for a little bit. And Billy is like, come on, you still don't think it was me, do you? And she's like, no, I just think it'd be real clever if the killer used his own one phone call to call me so I wouldn't think it was you, And he's like, listen, he gets real close to her. He's like, listen, what do I have to do to convince you it wasn't me? And as he's saying that, Ghostface is creeping up behind him. And she's like, Billy, look out. And he turns around and gets stabbed by Ghostface a couple times and falls over. Sydney immediately starts running. Her and Ghostface have a chase scene. And Sydney she locks herself in like this attic part of the house. And there's one window, and she's like, fuck it. And she goes to the window, and she's like hanging out of it, and Ghostface is trying to get at her, and she just falls out. And she lands on this boat that looks like the softest boat in the world, where, like, she lands flat. But the thing is, like, the boat, there's the part where the steering wheel is, and it's all full, like, she would have been so crooked up, falling into a boat. But she falls in this boat, and is somehow perfectly fine. She falls out right in front of the garage where she finally finds Rose McGowan's body. And she's like, oh, fuck. And you kind of forget that no one has seen Rose McGowan at this point. We go back inside, and Randy is on the couch, and there's a real fun little meta scene where Randy is watching as Michael Myers is creeping up behind Jamie Lee Curtis. And the whole time he's going, come on, Jamie. Just look behind you. Jamie's right behind you. And as he's saying this, Ghostface is right behind him. And obviously, Randy's name is Jamie Kennedy. And so it's kind of, it's a funny little scene. Ghostface gets right behind him and is about to stab him. But then he hears Sydney scream. And so it cuts away, and we cut to Sydney running to the van, and she jumps in. And she's like, there's a killer in there. And he's like, what? And then they look at the camera, and they see Ghostface creeping up behind Jamie Kennedy. And now you have Jamie Kennedy telling Jamie Lee Curtis to look behind you, Jamie. And then them in the van are like, look behind you, look behind you. And so they're doing it, And finally, Kenny the cameraman is like, fuck it, I gotta help the kid out, And he slides open the van door, but he looks and the front door is open. And he goes, oh shit, 30-second delay. And so he looks back, and we see Ghostface go to the door and open it up. And then when Kenny turns back around, Ghostface is there and cuts his throat and kills him. Sydney gets out and runs away again. Dewey and Courtney Cox are back. Dewey goes running into the house to look for Sydney, and Courtney Cox goes to the van, and she can't find Kenny, but she does see all this blood and shit. And she gets in the driver's seat and she revs up the car, and then she gets her phone and is calling 911. But then Randy comes and pops up next to her and it's like, hey, what's going on? And she fucking pelts him in the face, and she throws it in reverse, backs up, and then when she hits the brake, Kenny's dead body, which I guess has been on the roof. I don't know how Ghostface got his big frame up on the roof, but slides down in front, and she sees Kenny dead. And so then she puts it in drive, floors it, and as she's driving, Sydney comes out on the road and is like waving her arms and like, hey. And Courtney Cox just fucking swerves and then goes down the hill and shit and crashes the car. Sydney goes back to the house, and as she gets to the front door, Dewey steps out and he's like, Sydney? And then he falls down and we see he's been stabbed in the back and shit. And then Ghostface steps out. And he chases Sydney again. She manages to get into Dewey's car and lock the doors and shit, but she doesn't have the keys. Ghostface does, and he stands at the door and like waves them in her face, you know. So she tries to radio for police. But as she's doing this, we see in the back that the trunk is opening up, and Ghostface comes climbing in through the trunk and attacks her as she's radioing the police. She gets out. She runs to the front door again, and as she gets to the front door, Randy comes limping her way, and he's like, hey, Sydney. But then Stu comes running too, Stu's been gone ever since he went to go get beer. And Stu comes running and starts saying how it was Randy killing everyone and shit. And Randy is like, no, it was him, you know. And she gets Dewey's gun and is pointing at him. And then she's like, fuck you both. And she locks them out, you know. So she goes back in. As she's standing at the door, Billy, who we thought was dead, comes to the top of the stairs. And he's like, Sydney? And then he falls down and tumbles down all the stairs. And she's like, the killer, you know, all this shit. And he's like, it's okay, you know. He's like, just give me the gun. So she gives him the gun. He opens the door and lets Randy in. And Randy is like, guys, you know, Stu, he's gone mad and shit, you know. And then Billy goes, we all go a little mad sometimes. And then shoots fucking Jamie Kennedy. And then he's talking about how the blood on his shirt is pig's blood. Same stuff they use for the movies. And so Billy is the killer. And she's like, huh? So she goes running, bumps into Stu. And she's like, Stu, it was him, you know. And then Stu pulls up the voice thing and goes, surprise, Sydney, you know. So the big twist is that not only is there one killer, but there's two. Stu and Billy have been working together all along, which, like I said earlier, when there was two screams in the office or whatever, it's kind of funny now looking back. So anyway, they're both killers, and she says, you know, you guys won't get away with this and stuff. But they're like, oh yeah, well, we framed Cotton Weary and shit. And they say, you know, it was them who killed her mom. And apparently, her mom fucked Billy's dad, which then caused his parents to get divorced and shit. So that's kind of his inspiration behind this. During this whole thing is when Matthew Lillard gives his most just wild batshit performance, where he has so many lines at this point that I might just put in a couple here.
It's a fun game, Sydney. See, we ask you a question, and if you get it wrong, booga! You die. Watch a few movies, take a few notes. It was fun. No! Oh, we going. You see, Sid, everybody dies but us. Everybody dies but us. We're gonna carry on and plan the sequel, because let's face it, baby, these days, you gotta have a sequel. Ah!
Billy's got one. The police are on their way. What are you gonna tell them?
Peer pressure. I'm far too sensitive.
We'll rip you up, you bitch!
Fucking hit me with the phone, Dick! My mom and dad are gonna be so mad.
that he's just listing them. But he says the name, and he's like, "It's a real scream, baby," and he's slobbering and shit. He's all up on Billy's shoulders, which I have seen a lot of theories throughout the years that Billy and him may have been slightly homosexual or in some type of weird relationship, or at least Stu might have thought that, because Stu was very close up to him. But anyway, Stu is like, "I got one more surprise for you." And so he goes, brings out her dad, who's all tied up and shit. They start talking about how he's the prime suspect for all these killings and shit. They're going to make it look like he killed Sydney and then shot himself because he couldn't live with it. But she's like, "Well, you two are unscathed," or whatever. And they're like, "Oh, we thought about that." So they take turns stabbing each other. Billy stabs Stu, and then Stu stabs Billy, and then Billy gets the gun back, or the knife back again, and starts like slashing Stu. And this is when maybe his most famous line in the movie, where Stu goes, "Come on, I'm feeling woozy here," you know.
But Billy, would you alright? I can't take anymore. I'm feeling woozy here.
And they're just batshit crazy at this point. Stu goes to get the gun that he was holding, but as he goes to get the gun, it's gone, and he's like, "What the fuck?" And then Courtney Cox comes walking back in, and she's like, "Yeah, assholes, I got the gun." Billy doesn't even give a shit, though. He just walks up and like kicks her into a pole, and knocks her out. Turns out that she had the safety on, so that's why he wasn't afraid. They look back, and Sydney and her dad are gone, and they're like, "Where the fuck are you, you bitch?" I think at this point in this scene is where they first use the F word. I don't think they say fuck a single time throughout the movie until this ending part. The phone rings, and Sydney is using the voice changer to make fun of them and shit. Then she says she like called the cops and stuff, you know, and Billy's freaking out. He's like, "I'm gonna kill you, bitch," and he's running around. Stu picks out the phone at this point, and she's like, "Ah, poor Stu. What are you gonna say, you know?" And Stu goes, "Peer pressure. I have terrible self-esteem," or whatever. And it was funny as fuck. Also, I mean, Stu, because then fucking Billy goes and takes the phone and says something again, and then he throws it and hits fucking Stu. And Stu goes, "Ow, you hit me with the fucking phone, you dick." And he's just, I think he even says, he's like, "I think I'm dying." He's just bleeding out. He's not doing very good. And he picks up the phone again, and he's like, "Sydney, did you really call the cops?" And she's like, "You bet your life I did." And he goes, "My mom and dad are going to be so mad at me." Fucking Stu's amazing. Billy goes walking like down the hall, and as he does, Sydney comes breaking out of a doorway and stabs him with an umbrella. She took the time to change into the whole Ghostface outfit and everything. Also, apparently there's a thing where the guy playing Billy had like heart surgery when he was a kid or something. And so they had a little cushion thing, and the first one they hit, and then the second stab it missed and hit this metal plate that he has in his chest that causes excruciating pain. So his scream was real and stuff. But she stabs him a couple times. Stu pops out, goes charging after her. They fight. She breaks a vase over his head, and then he's laying there, and she goes to the TV that's still playing Halloween and pushes it over, and it lands on Stu's head, and looks like it electrocutes him and shit, you know? And so Stu is dead. There's a lot of theories that he might have lived. It's to the point that even this new Scream movie, a lot of people think that maybe Stu is back to be the killer again. So, she gets to the phone again to call her. Yeah, whatever. But then it turns out Randy is still alive. And he's like, "I probably should be dead, but I've never been so happy to be a virgin, you know?" But then Billy shows up again. He knocks Randy out. He starts to attack Sydney. Sydney, like, puts her finger in the umbrella hole and shit. And then he starts to... but then he gets her off, and he gets the knife, and he goes to stab her. But Courtney Cox is back up. and shoots Billy, and Billy falls over. All three of them walk over to Billy, and Randy says, "Careful, this is when the supposed dead killer comes back to life for one more scare." And sure enough, Billy is like, "Huh," and lunges, but Sidney just shoots him in the head, and Billy is officially dead. After this, the dad is still alive. We also see that Dewey is still alive. He's being put onto an ambulance. He's on a stretcher and shit. Courtney Cox immediately starts doing a news story outside. She did not wait long to get a new cameraman. And she started talking about everything that's happened. And that is the end of Scream. Happily ever after. This movie had a budget of... Hold on. Movie had a budget of $15 million, made a box office of $173 million. So I think I saw it was like the 25th or 21st most successful or profitable horror movie. That might be bullshit, but I think I read that somewhere. The Mask, I wrote this down just because it involves Pink Floyd. The Mask is based on a few things. The painting Scream by Edward Munch. The characters on the cover of the Pink Floyd album The Wall, which isn't true because the cover of the album The Wall is just a wall. So, I mean, I know the characters it's talking about. I'll probably put the pictures in of all these things. But I get what they're saying. But and then the ghostly characters that appeared in the 1930s Betty Bopp cartoon, which I kind of wonder if anyone's ever seen that one ghost that's like dancing. It's like, my baby left me. I wonder if that's the one they're talking about. But that's what The Mask was based on. So that makes me think that kind of this was made for the movie. It wasn't a mask that was being sold and shit. But anyway. Also the line that I really like, which is the you know, you hit me with the phone, dickhead. Apparently the phone really slipped and hit Stu, and that was improvised, and they really liked it. Same thing with my mom and dad are going to be so mad at me. That was improvised, and they really like that, so they kept it in. And like I said, Matthew Lillard, that last couple minutes really turns it up to 100. but anyway. So yeah, Scream. If you've never watched it, go check it out. It's pretty solid. Like I said, coming up, we will be checking out the sequels. We'll burn through until we get to the newest one, and then we'll be finished with Scream. Yeah. Anyone who watched Dexter back in the day, go check out Dexter New Blood, the one more season they made of it. If you finished that because everyone hated the ending of Dexter, and I see people are mixed on this ending. But man, this season it's way better than a lot of those later seasons. So check it out if you haven't. Also, go if it's been a while since you've played a Halo game, go check out Halo Infinite. I've been playing it. It's free if you have Xbox Game Pass. And the multiplayer is just free everywhere. You can play multiplayer in it. But the campaign is really good. So I've been surprised. Because the last one I think I enjoyed was maybe Reach. Because Halo 4, I remember people were kind of shitty about. And then Halo 5 was the one that they introduced, like, those robot fucking enemies, the Sentinels. Was that it? I don't know, but they sucked, and everyone was like, get the shit out of here. But, anyway. Alright, well, hey, Monday coming out will be Scream 2, and overtime for Scream 2. Friday should be Don't Breathe 2. We'll have that. And then the next 2 Mondays will be Scream 3 and Scream 4. So check those out. Anyway, thanks for watching. Like, share, subscribe. I feel like I haven't said that in a long time, so do that if you will. This year, the second year of the podcast has been really good so far. I don't think we mentioned it, we hit our first 10K view episode a while ago, which was Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the beginning, that overtime we did. Which is funny because I think that was one of my least favorite That might have been my least favorite Texas Chainsaw movie, and that's the one that took off. But anyway, thanks a lot, guys, watching. See you Monday, Scream 3. Friday, Don't Breathe 2. I'll catch you then. All right.